My photo, and this is what stands out to me. In my sketch, you'll see that I've moved the big tree in a little bit. It's a little bit too close to that edge over there, so I've moved this tree this way. I might even just move it in a tad more, looking at it. So I want that tree to sit somewhere around here. Somewhere, if that's the tree trunk, something like that. And then the canopy of this tree, of course, something like this. So that's, you know, forgetting this sort of big pom-pom shape, if you like, of the canopy, the crown of the tree. We've really essentially got a nice sort of vertical just where we want it. And then what continues the L-shape story is that pontoon that comes across something like that. So that is the design. As simple as it is, that is our design. The next thing we've got to sort of establish, just put that down for a second, is just how much of the background we want in this painting. I'm just going to grab an eraser for a moment. It's quite important to make sure that that is a good horizontal there, okay? Between that point there and that point there. If you want to use something to measure, like your pencil, something like that, you can do so. But yeah, you don't want that running uphill or running downhill in any particular direction. So what I like about the pontoon is it's almost a sort of skeletal form. It's almost like looking at the sort of the dorsal line of a big prehistoric animal. And I like that sort of quality to it. I don't make too much of the horizontal, to be honest, when we get to painting it. It's more about the verticals of the posts. Now, what you've got to remember is, on this pontoon, there'll be a post on both sides. So if this post here that I'm pointing to is the one on the furthest side, it's a slightly lower height than this one on this side, okay? So if that one's the one on the furthest side of the pontoon, the height of that one will put slightly lower than that one. But they will diminish as they go down here because our central point, our nearest point, is from about here onwards. So the posts do get a little bit taller. But the one on the furthest side of the pontoon will always be that little bit shorter. They don't have to be perfect. So this one will be a bit higher again than this one because it's nearer. It's on our side of the pontoon. And the one corresponding to the other side over there will be a little bit shorter again until we probably finish something like this. Maybe a hint of the one on the other side of the pontoon. Making sure that each one has got its respective opposite. So you notice as it goes down towards in the right-hand direction, because it's going further away from us, see how these squeeze up, the posts get a bit closer to each other. So they're quite open about here because this is much closer to us. The scale is bigger, everything, the gaps, the posts, everything is wider and bigger and taller. But as we travel down the pontoon further away from us, all those measurements get squeezed up a bit, just shrink. Okay, so then we have the posts that go into the water, the underside posts, and they're sort of the same sort of height, so almost the same measurement. I'm not sure whether that's a good thing, but what we must establish, of course, is under each post that we can see on top of pontoon, because the post actually comes down the side, or the near side anyway. You can see the post come down the near side of the pontoon. But of course, the post on the opposite side of the pontoon, there must be a gap because the pontoon itself obscures the that point of the post. So that's what can tell your viewer that these posts here are the ones this side. Think about there, something like that. Whereas the posts on the opposite side of the pontoon will have a little gap. But they are mostly going into the water, not quite, but mostly going into the water at the same horizontal. There's a very small amount of shrinkage to that, to where the furthest posts touch the water, to where the near posts touch the water. The furthest posts are slightly higher up, but it's because of don't worry about that too much. I'll tell you why, because we'll be using reflections on these posts, so it's a nice little sort of get out, if you like, of not having to worry about whether those measurements are correct or not, because the extension of the reflection will hide where those posts actually meet the water. So we have post continuing down this side. Something like that. And it's funny, isn't it? I mean, I think this is why it's so important for you to see how I think out this process, because, you know, prior to perhaps just perhaps before you saw me sketch mine out, you may have just thought it was all about all the other stuff in this photo, the lovely little huts, you know, the white huts. Well, we can include them, but had we have allowed ourselves to be distracted by the less important stuff, shapes, we'd have missed this fantastic design. You know, it's always about, whenever you're working from a photo, it's always firstly about establishing your design. What's making that painting worth looking at, you know? So now that we've got that sort of sketch in, and you can see how much I've brought that into these posts into this sketch. I have done heavy lines elsewhere because I wanted you to be able to see my sketch, but I will probably hint upon this hut over here. So I'm sort of looking at my photo again, really, not really worried about this little grey building that's right at the edge, not really worried about that at all. But I think it'd be nice to perhaps hint upon this building here. Okay, yeah, so just finishing the pontoon. So I put in the hut here, but I'm not going to make too much of that, but I'll draw it in anyway. And then there's the other building, which is sort of under the tree. It's a little bit higher. I'm not sure, again, you know, it's just a shape. We don't have to include it. And if we do include it, even though I'm drawing it in, I see it as an option that we can use. If I do include it, then, you know, I won't make much of it. So the rest of it, so we're still always concentrating on the L shape, okay? The big oak tree, if that's what it is, and the pontoon. Now, everything else is just padding, if you like. So we want some figures in here. Now, there are figures sat over to the right-hand side at tables, but we've got I think we'd be better off, rather than put these figures through the busyness of these posts. I think they get lost. I don't see any value in putting the figures in, because yes, we can see them in the photo, but and my posts are higher because I think there's more dynamic to a taller post. So I'm going to put a couple of figures on our pontoon. And I'll just place the head of a figure just to the left of this tree here. And if you can see that, okay. So the head's about here. The body is this sort of size. You know, you'd expect the head and shoulders to be just above the height of these posts. So if we put a couple more figures in, I think we'll leave that until the towards the end of the painting. You know, I've found a figure here. I'm sure I didn't draw that in, but there's another potential figure about here. So as I say, we'll deal with, if we do put a couple of figures sat at tables, they've got to be much lower. Just a head, a square for the upper torso. If they're sat down, that's all you're going to see is the head and a square sort of torso, because they're sat down beyond this, you know, further away from our chap that stood on the pontoon. Right, let's get some paint going. I'm going to start with a large round brush, and I think we'll pick up, I want some, you know, some nice clean colors in this. I think of that place and just how lovely it is, how when the sun's out in particular, and how the colors are quite sort of spring-like. A lot of those greens are quite limey, and those are the sort of greens you get around spring. You get them, those colder looking yellows and greens. So I'm just pre-wetting the whole area for a moment. I'll stay out of the roof of those buildings, and I'll be sort of careful not to paint over the posts too much. I mean, it doesn't matter if we do paint over the posts, but just to be on the safe side, what I'm doing, as you can see probably, is I'm just placing water between the posts. Now, I think we've got to get this wash into the water as well. So the only thing I'll be mindful not to paint over will be the horizontal of the pontoon itself. We can't really paint the flat of the pontoon, because it's just the shape that we can see is a light strip and a dark strip. So if we leave a light area of paper, if we leave an unpainted strip of paper in a horizontal fashion, then all we need to do is put some dark immediately underneath it, and we will have created the wooden pontoon. So there we are. I've pre-wetted everything. I'm going to pick up some very small amount, I hasten to add, of the phthalo green. Okay. And just going in with that phthalo green, just to get me off the mark, if you like. Nice and weak, not committing to anything too drastic by doing that. Move it around a bit, get comfortable moving the paintbrush around. It's your first, you know, the first physical move you've made on this painting. So, you know, be casual about it. Just push it around. Little bit more of the green down here. If there's you know, if there's water around, you can be sure that that water is going to reflect colors that are elsewhere in the scene. Now let's pick up a little bit of ultramarine blue, a little bit more perhaps than I had in the brush of the phthalo green. So that blue can go back here a little bit. Probably stay out of the main canopy of the bigger tree with the blue, because I'm choosing to hit this area with blue because it's a bit further back. Okay, not much further back, but enough to just to suggest a bit of a cooler temperature change back there. Now yellow. Now we must sort of look to create these limey green colors. I'm picking up a bit of cadmium yellow, about the same amount again as the ultramarine blue that we just picked up. And now I can go into this nearer tree and as well into some of the stuff at the back there. So in we go again, perhaps a little bit stronger. Perhaps I'll pick up a little bit of the raw Sienna that we put on our list. Because yes, the greens need to be very lime-like, you know, very yeah, sort of lime greens. But having said that, we know something else about color, and that is you must always play off warms against cools. So the cools will dominate, but the little bit of raw Sienna, which is a much warmer yellow, will offer variation. Okay. Now then, I'm sort of taking a breather here, and while I'm doing it, I'm cleaning some of this water out of this brush, because my paper here is cockling, is buckling, and I can see troughs and you know, collecting water and paint. So just weighing up what I'll do with that. I think some of that warmth that we just put up here must be reflected directly underneath in the water. So just going across here, something like that. Incidentally, reflected colors are always slightly muted to those that are compared to the actual object that they are reflecting. So if this was a really bright yellow, can you imagine, you know, at the moment, if a lot in our gardens we can see forsythia. Forsythia is that, you know, bright yellow flower bush, incredibly bright. Now if you put that next to water, if it was hanging over water, you'd find that the reflected yellow off that would be more mustardy. It'd be slightly muted. And so that's what happens with reflected colors. We're not done with this yet. I've just brought a little bit of that green down into the tree trunk. Nice big tree trunk here. I think we've probably got to continue working a little bit to create more sense of woodland back here. So I'm being a little less generous with the water. Okay, picking up about the same amount of paint, and I'm picking up Viridian again, or Pthalo green, whichever it is you've got, and raw Sienna. But there's a bit less water in this brush, because by doing this, the shapes that I'm making will stick because of there being less water in the mix. So perhaps a little bit more of the cadmium yellow, making sure all the time that I'm mostly cool. These greens are mostly of a cool you know, bias. This was autumn, of course. There'd be a lot more use of the raw Sienna and less use of colors like the phthalo green and the blue. So just want to create here a good backdrop for what's going to, you know, be placed in front of it all. And that may not, you know, well, we know for sure that when we get towards the end of the painting, we will have to show the main tree off much better than this. But for the moment, it really is just it's just there to establish the color temperatures, with less attention given to tonal jumps. It's really just about color temperature at this stage. I'm just going around my shapes. I think we ought to bring more of this color again back down into the water. I'm using mostly horizontal brush marks here. And we'll darken up this corner probably. And just, I quite like what's going on in the photo, in that there's a patch of light here where my hand is. Okay, right. So at some point, I think we'll probably need to go a bit darker than what we see in the photo for the underside of the pontoon. Now, I think what I'll do before I do anything else is cut down on the water in this brush again, increase the paint, but we'll change the color because there's quite the main tree trunk of this big tree is quite a warm dark if you look at it in the photo. I wouldn't consider that tree trunk to be a dark cool. I think it's a dark warm. So we'll pick up here a little bit of burnt sienna and into that. I may have picked up a little too much there. Let's see how that goes. No, it's okay. Into that, we'll put some a smallish amount of ultramarine blue. And that immediately, because I don't put too much of the blue in, that immediately darkens the burnt sienna. So it stays warm, you know, it stays a dark, warm color. And that's because I was careful as to how much of the ultramarine blue I put in. Now then, this is going to be a test shot. This mark I'm about to make is going to be a test because I'm guessing, I'm pretty certain that when I make contact with this paper that's still wet, that is going to spread. Yeah, it's moving, it's drifting. So I would be very careful to confine your delivery of paint to the center of the shape, the center of the tree trunk. Don't push it out to the edge of the tree trunk because it's doing that of its own accord. We can move up into the canopy a bit because up here, as I go up now, as I go up into the canopy, I'm seeing those darks get a lot cooler. So I'll once again pick up some Viridian green or Pthalo green, whichever it is you're using, and use that up here as a cooler dark. And the closer these darks get to the top of the tree trunk, the more they warm up. Now I'm going to, I don't like the idea that I've sort of isolated the hut behind. I'm going to cut across that roof line back there. Be a bit cooler again. This is working wet into wet, of course. And I think we'll let that do its thing. I'm going to help this delivery of paint in the tree trunk down with a small brush. We'll actually put some paint in the brush. Same mix as I use for the tree trunk, which is ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And I just picked up a bit of phthalo blue by mistake then. Shouldn't matter too much. So yeah, I'm going to bring this down and cut around my post. And immediately I know that I've got at least one good post that's going to stand out because I've painted around it. Now, you know, a lot of watercolorists will favor using masking fluid. Each to their own. Honestly, it's whatever works for you. I'm just going to take another sort of secondary limb, if you like, off this tree over to there. So I've got a nice little pocket of space about there. Yeah, sorry. So I like to cut around my shapes. there's a couple of things I don't like about masking fluid. For me personally, the worst thing is probably the waiting time that you have to sort of apply the masking fluid before you start painting. You have to then wait at least 15 minutes before you can go anywhere near it with paint. And then once it's all dry, you have to wait longer again before you can remove, sometimes 24 hours before you can remove the masking fluid if you want a really clean removal. And then on top of that, once removed, you've got an edge that is so hard, it looks artificial. So you end up having to contrive an edge, a better looking, an edge that's got both soft and hard areas to it. So I think it's personally much, and I say personally, it's, you know, each to their own. It's much easier just to sort of cut out. It does feel trickier in the initial stages to do that. It's a skill that might need a bit of you know, extra attention from you, but it's worth it in the long run if you can get used to sort of cutting your shapes out rather than relying on masking fluid. Don't get me wrong, I mean, there are some plenty of watercolorists out there that use masking fluid on a regular basis, and I love their work. You know, I don't see anything untoward in the finished work. So it's just it's almost a you know, it's a personality thing, you know. Yeah, I like to work a little freer than that, than sticking to anything that rigid as a hard a shape that's left with such a hard edge that I have to deal with later. I had to sort of get to my paintings and have them more or less finished by the time I've finished that session. There's always room a day later to add something else if you so wish to do so. Anyway, I'm just tapping now. I'm just picking up all the colors that I've been mixing in a big puddle here, and I'm tapping some of that into this canopy area up here. Now, to me, before I do any, I can continue tapping. It doesn't have to be wet in wet. I can tap onto that when it goes dry later for some extra effect. But what I feel as though I do have to deal with here is the tree trunk is looking artificial. It's looking wrong. It just doesn't look very natural. And that's simply because we need to sort of lift some light areas, especially in the sort of lower territory down here to one side. We would expect a lot of light to be coming from the direction of the water, which of course for the tree is this left-hand side of the tree. You'd expect some reflected light on this side of the tree down here. So that's what I'm doing. This is a thirsty brush, a brush that I've cleaned in the water and then squeezed all the water back out, and it's damp. It's just a thirsty. When the brush is like this, when it's damp, it is thirsty and it takes paint off really nicely. So there, that tree has got a sense of three dimension to it. It has form. It has that cylindrical quality to it. You can sometimes in the shadow edge back there take off a really small amount. You'd get a little bit of reflected light on that. A very thin line of reflected light on the opposite side there. By creating light around the edges of your form, you give it its depth, its, you know, its weight, its volume. Okay, right. That looks better. Now then, there's a little bit of a dark jump there around the post, which you've got to be a bit careful of. It can look a little bit contrived. Sometimes what I do in situations like this, because that tree trunk's got a lot of paint in it, I'll just dunk this small brush in water, and it will drip water. There's so much water in this brush here now that it will drip. I just shake off the surplus. But what this will allow me to do is just drop a bit of water into that darker area of paint, and you get quite a nice tree trunk type texture effect in there. You could even go into that again with a color. So perhaps you might sort of think, if I pick up a little bit of raw sienna with a bit of cadmium yellow in it, drop that while that water that you just put on there is still developing, you can put a little bit of another color like this yellow that I've just put in. All these things go to make you know, good textures. A little bit of alizarin crimson maybe in here. Do try to know when to stop though. Okay, so yeah, you can do as much spattering or as little spattering as you want. I would try to keep this technique of spattering towards the edge of your shape. There's not a lot of point in spattering into the central area of the tree. We can go back into that area again later and do other things, but I would concentrate around the edges of your tree. Edges are the most important part of any shape. You know, it's the edge of your shapes that tells you what you're looking at, gives you the identification of that object. Okay, that's enough on the tree for the moment. As I say, we can go back into that. There's so many things, you know, we could do before leaving the tree while it's still wet. You know, I could take this. This is you could use a credit card. I happen to have a metal painting knife in my hand here, and you can just pull out the odd illuminated tree trunk. You have to be a little bit careful as to really think like a tree. People say I do that anyway, but you have to really imagine that, you know, about how those little tree branches would appear in that canopy. You have to put yourself there and imagine that. Don't just go randomly scraping lines into the tree, into the top of the tree. It won't look very good. So maybe there's a tree trunk comes out, a tree branch rather, that comes out from the central area like this. If you do make a bit of a hash of that, I suggest what you do is, if you say, well, I like some of those marks that I've made in the tree, but I don't like all of them, I've overdone it, then take a bit of paint on a small brush and just press over those areas, and you'll be able to sort of knock back anything you don't like. Okay, this could have been a demonstration just about how to paint a single oak tree. I'm going to speed dry this for a moment. Right, so I'm sticking with the small pointed brush, and we're just going to hint upon some detail. So I'm picking up some, here's my usual little trick here of taking a pickle jar lid, okay, ultramarine blue. Why do I do this? Why do I keep this separate? Why don't I just make this mix from my normal palette over here somewhere? Reason being is because when you've been dealing with such big washes in the initial stages, every time you pick up paint from one of these little wells, you flood it with water. It then becomes quite difficult to get this sort of mix because of the amount of water that's in here. So on this purely dry surface, if I'm careful where I pick my paint up from the middle of my soft, lovely, fresh paint here, then I'll always know that that's a nice, sticky, dry brush mix. Right, so I'm just going to hint upon a couple of lines. It might be the line of the roof back there. But in a moment, where I really want to get my attention over to is the pontoon. But let's just pick off one or two areas that we might want to suggest a bit of extra detail. There's an edge about here. Yeah, let's get some inference to the underside of the pontoon. As I said, we can't paint the top of the pontoon, not not directly anyway. We might be able to go a bit darker above in the background, which will show the top of the pontoon off. But for the moment, what I want us to concentrate on is the underside of the pontoon. I'm just making sure I've got my mix right here. I've actually picked up this time a little bit of raw sienna. So there's 3 colors in here now: ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and over on this edge, you can think of this little sticky puddle here. It's hardly a puddle. This sticky mix where I've kept the blue over to this side over here, okay? And I've added the raw sienna and the burnt sienna and the blue has been mostly over here. And when I add the little bit of raw sienna, it lives over at this edge. That gives me a nice quality of mixes, even though this is dark. And you know, you might think, well, it's just dark, surely, Howard. Why does it matter whether, you know, there's 2 colors in it or 3 colors in it? What it does, I think the eye is incredibly sensitive, even in dark mixes, to see something go very flat. Right, so what I'm doing here is I'm traveling along the underside of the pontoon, and to a point, as soon as the paint stops wanting to come off the brush, I find the smallest amount of water from somewhere. Now, remember that the nearer posts, like this one here, you don't want to be taking a line through that, because they're that post there is our side of the pontoon. So this one is on our side of the pontoon, but the post back here, I can draw a line through because it's the other side of the pontoon. Right, again through here and through here. So I'm reloading, just putting a bit of fresh. I'll do the same thing. If I'm putting blue into the mix, it'll go over here in the far edge. Then a bit of burnt sienna in the middle, mixed ever so slightly with the blue. And then over to this nearer side to me here, the raw sienna, okay? Right, so the nearest posts, we won't put too much dark in them, okay? But in the posts on the other side of the pontoon, with a bit of water, we'll make those darker. This one here is the other side of the pontoon. This one here is the other side of the pontoon. This one is the other side of the pontoon. I think they sort of match up more or less. Bring them down to where we think the water is. Now here's a little trick. Here's a little technique for just getting some early hints of reflection in. Forget the near posts for the moment. I'm just dealing with the posts that are on the other side of the pontoon. Now, if I take a little bit more water, moving this sticky mix away slightly from a dry mix, I'll estimate roughly where that line of water is, where these posts meet the water. Say it's about there on this one here, okay? And I'll put another mark where I think that one meets the water. It should be parallel to the edge of your paper, okay? And then within a couple of seconds, sorry, I'll take a clean finger, okay, place it on there and just pull down like that. Be as vertical as you can, okay? And again, and again. Now, here's a bit of an odd thing about reflections. If this is the central point, okay, to our view, this is where our eyes are here. Forget the focal point, that's something else. Our eyes are here in the center of the scene. Now then, a reflection directly in front of you will come vertically straight towards you, okay? But as you move to the right, those reflections follow you. So you want to just put a slight turn May have overdone it a little bit, but I'm making the point, I hope. So the further they go off to the right, the more acute that angle comes, because reflections follow you. As soon as we go to the left, okay, that reflection will turn in towards you in this direction. Another one there, it'll come in this direction. Because that's, next time you're near water, you can see this for yourself. Get yourself somewhere near where you can get a reflection of a vertical object and move around. Look at the if you've got something like this where you've got posts in the water, look at the post immediately in front of you without turning your head to the right or left, and you'll find that that reflection is very vertical and comes straight to your feet. Without moving your body, turn your head and look at a post to the right, okay, and you'll see that that reflection comes from that angle towards your feet, and the same with the left. Mustn't confuse reflections with shadows, of course.